The Empire's overconfidence. The Xiverian Empire was feared across the galaxy. For centuries, they had crushed weaker species, expanding their empire without challenge. Their fleet was massive, their weapons advanced, and their commanders ruthless. No civilization had ever stood against them and survived. So when the Xiverian Grand Admiral Vorkath received reports of human ships in restricted space, he didn't feel concern. He felt annoyed. Humans were a young race, barely a century into space travel. They had no empire, no great fleets, no homeworld worth mentioning. To the Xiverians, they were nothing more than upstart creatures who had gotten lucky with technology they barely understood. Vorkath sat in the command chair of his flagship, the Dominion's Wrath, surrounded by his officers. Before him, a massive viewing screen displayed the human fleet, if it could even be called that. Only 12 ships, small, sleek, and poorly armed. No match for the Xiverian armada that had surrounded them. Vorkath's fleet consisted of over 100 warships, each one carrying enough firepower to destroy an entire planet. The battle was already over before it had begun. The admiral allowed himself a small smirk, open a channel to the human leader. A moment later, the screen flickered. A human captain appeared, a man with short brown hair, calm eyes, and a relaxed posture, as if he were sitting in a bar instead of facing certain death. Vorkath leaned forward, his voice cold and commanding. "Human vessel, you have trespassed into Xiverian space. Surrender immediately, and your deaths will be swift. Resist, and we will erase your existence from the stars." The human blinked. Then, to Vorkath's surprise, he laughed. Not just a chuckle, a full, hearty laugh. The Xiverian officers around Vorkath stiffened. Some exchanged confused glances. No species had ever laughed in the face of an Imperial Admiral's demand before. Vorkath's smirk disappeared. His yellow eyes narrowed. "Did I say something amusing?" The human captain wiped a tear from his eye, still grinning. "Oh, it's just, I've heard this speech before. You know, from other so-called great empires that thought they could bully humanity." Vorkath's expression darkened, and the human shrugged. "They're all dead now." Silence filled the command deck. The Xiverian officers looked at their admiral, waiting for his response. Vorkath clenched his fist. How dare this primitive creature mock him? "Very well," he said, his voice now filled with cold fury. "If you will not surrender, then you will be crushed." He turned to his weapons officer. "Fire a warning shot. Let them see their mistake." A moment later, a massive plasma beam shot out from one of the Xiverian dreadnoughts, aimed just beside the lead human vessel. The energy crackled as it passed, tearing through the empty void of space. But the human ships didn't move. They didn't dodge. They didn't activate shields. They just stayed there. Vorkath frowned. That was strange. Any sane commander would have at least tried to evade such an attack. Then, another strange thing happened. The moment the plasma beam reached the human ship, it simply vanished. The energy dispersed into nothingness, as if it had never existed. Vorkath's eyes widened. He turned sharply to his weapons officer. "What happened?" The officer frantically checked his readings. "Admiral, our shot had no effect. Their ships just absorbed the energy." Vorkath's claws dug into the armrests of his chair. "Impossible. No known technology can neutralize Iverian plasma weapons." The human captain chuckled. "Oh, I wouldn't say that. You Xiverians love to brag about your unmatched firepower, but you never stop to wonder if someone's already found a way to counter it." Vorkath's face twisted with rage. Enough of this. He turned to his fleet. "Prepare all cannons. We will annihilate them." But before he could give the final command, the human captain spoke again, his voice casual, almost amused. "That was cute," he said. "Now it's our turn." Suddenly, the human ships vanished. 1 second, they were there. The next, gone. Not cloaked. Not hidden behind some distortion field. just completely erased from every sensor, as if they had never been there at all. The Xivarian bridge erupted in chaos. Where did they go? They're not on any of our scanners. This is impossible. Vorkath's cold confidence shattered. He had planned for a quick, easy victory. Instead, something was very wrong. And for the first time in his life, Grand Admiral Vorkath felt something new. Fear. The first strike. An unseen trick. The bridge of the Dominion's wrath was in chaos. Alarms blared, red lights flashed, and officers scrambled over their consoles, desperately trying to locate the human fleet. But there was nothing. Admiral Vorkath's jaw tightened as he stared at the massive viewing screen. One moment, the human ships had been in front of them. Small, fragile, insignificant. The next, they were gone. Not destroyed, not cloaked, just erased. His yellow reptilian eyes flicked to his sensors officer. What happened? The officer's hands shook as he worked the console. Admiral, I don't know. Their signal just vanished from all scanners. It's like they were never here. Vorkath's claws tapped against the armrest of his command throne. He refused to believe it. The Xivarian Empire ruled through military superiority, through absolute control of the battlefield. No species had ever simply disappeared. This is a trick, Vorkath growled. Humans are not gods. Find them. Now. A Xivarian tactical officer gulped and nodded. He adjusted the ship's long-range sensors, pushing them to their absolute limits. He tried scanning for ion trails, gravitational distortions, residual heat signatures. Nothing. Then, a new alarm screeched across the command deck. Multiple energy signatures detected. Vorkath's head snapped toward the officer. Where? The officer froze, eyes wide. His mouth opened and closed, as if he was struggling to speak. Vorkath snarled. Where? The officer swallowed hard. Behind us, Admiral. The viewing screen flickered, switching to rear sensors. The human fleet had reappeared. Not just anywhere, right behind the Xivarian formation. Vorkath's claws tightened around the armrest. Impossible. His fleet had completely surrounded the humans just moments ago. There was no way they could have moved that fast. No known technology could allow it. And yet there they were. The 12 human ships, now positioned at point-blank range, directly behind his most valuable warships. Then, Vorkath noticed something that sent a chill through his spine. The human ships weren't facing his fleet. They were already firing. The first kill. The Xivarian dreadnought Revenant was the first to die. A brilliant white beam shot out from the lead human ship, punching straight through the dreadnought's heavily armored hull like it was made of paper. A second later. Boom. The Revenant erupted in a silent explosion, its reinforced hull crumbling in a flash of blue and white fire. Vorkath's eyes widened. One of his most powerful warships had just been vaporized in a single hit. What kind of weapon? Before he could finish his sentence, 2 more Xivarian ships went up in flames. The human weapons weren't massive plasma blasts or heavy kinetic railguns. They were something else. Something surgical, precise, deadly. Each shot was clean, efficient, targeting critical weak points with unbelievable accuracy. Evade. Turn the fleet around. Vorkath roared. But it was too late. The humans had already calculated the Xivarian fleet's movements before they had even made them. Every Xivarian ship that tried to maneuver found itself cut off, surrounded, or hit before it could react. The fear sets in. A Xivarian communications officer gasped. Admiral, we're receiving transmissions from across the fleet. They're asking for orders. Vorkath clenched his jaw. Orders? What orders? This battle was supposed to be trivial. A show of force. A lesson to these weak, primitive humans. Instead, his forces were panicking. Then, the human captain's voice echoed once more across the bridge. Hey, Admiral. Vorkath whirled toward the viewing screen. The human was back, still calm, still grinning. "How's it feel?" the human asked. Vorkath's claws dug into the metal of his throne. "How does what feel?" The human leaned forward. His smirk widened. "To be outmatched." Vorkath roared in fury. "You dare." The human cut the transmission. A second later, the human fleet vanished again. And then, the real slaughter began. The trap springs shut. The bridge of the Dominion's wrath was eerily silent. The only sounds were the faint hum of the ship's power core and the sharp, anxious breaths of the Xivarian officers. Admiral Vorkath's claws tightened around his throne's armrests. His once invincible fleet had just suffered a humiliating blow. 3 ships destroyed in seconds, and the enemy, those insignificant humans, had vanished again. This wasn't war. This was a nightmare. His tactical officer's voice trembled as he spoke. "Admiral, our weapons are ineffective. We can't track them. We can't predict them. What are your orders?" Vorkath inhaled slowly, forcing his rage into cold focus. He was still in command. He still had the largest war fleet in this sector. And he was not about to lose to a species that was barely considered worthy of galactic recognition. "Switch all ships to manual targeting," he ordered. "Spread out our formation. If they appear again, I want every ship to fire immediately." The officers scrambled to obey, adjusting systems and relaying commands to the fleet. The Xivarian Armada, what remained of it, expanded outward, forming a loose sphere instead of the tight formation they had used before. Vorkath leaned forward, his yellow eyes scanning the screen. "Where are you, humans?" Then, a blip on the scanners. Contact. Vorkath's heart pounded. He had them now. "Where?" he barked. The officer checked his readings, then went completely still. His scaled face paled in horror. Vorkath's patience snapped. "Speak." The officer's voice was barely a whisper. "There, inside our formation." Vorkath's blood ran cold. How had the humans slipped past every sensor, every patrol, every defense? And then, chaos. The first wave, precision carnage. The human ships reappeared, not at a safe distance, not at the edges of battle, but right in the middle of the Xivarian fleet. And they were already firing. The Reaper's Claw, a Xivarian battlecruiser, barely had time to register the attack before a human railgun round punched through its core reactor. The ship detonated instantly, its debris slamming into 2 nearby destroyers, crippling their shields. Another Xivarian vessel, the Obsidian Fang, attempted to retreat, its thrusters flaring to full power. It never got the chance. A human missile, moving faster than anything Vorkath had ever seen, struck the ship's rear engine. The explosion ripped through its hull, sending twisted metal and screaming crew members into space. Vorkath's eyes widened. This wasn't war. This was surgical dissection. Xivarian panic. The collapse begins. "Admiral, we're losing ships too fast. They're inside our fleet. We can't hit them. Our targeting systems are useless. They're moving too fast." Vorkath gritted his teeth. He had expected a simple battle. Instead, his forces were being torn apart like prey caught in a hunter's trap. And the worst part, the humans were playing with them. They didn't go for the biggest ships first. They didn't try to destroy the command vessels immediately. They were picking apart the fleet, taking out supply ships, disrupting communications, crippling the Xivarian forces piece by piece. Psychological warfare. The fear takes hold. Vorkath's comm screen flickered. The human captain appeared again. Still calm, still relaxed. "Something wrong, Admiral?" the human asked. Vorkath's claws dug into his throne. "You cowards," he snarled. "Fight us properly. Face us like warriors." The human smiled. "Ah, see, that's your problem. You think war is about honor, about tradition." He leaned closer, his eyes glinting. "We don't fight fair, Admiral. We fight to win. The transmission cut off. And then, the second wave hit. The final blow, the Empire's knees buckle. Explosions rippled through the Xiverian fleet as the human ships accelerated, weaving through enemy lines like ghosts. They fired without hesitation, hitting engines, targeting systems, and power cores. A Xiverian dreadnought tried to lock onto a human ship. But before it could fire, a plasma bolt from another Xiverian cruiser hit its own ally. "Admiral," an officer cried out, "we're hitting our own ships. Our targeting systems are being hacked." Vorketh froze. Hacked? That was impossible. Xiverian technology was the most advanced in the galaxy. No species, especially not these primitive mammals, should have been able to override their systems. And yet, here they were. Blinded, helpless. His fleet was turning against itself. The breaking point. The fleet fractures. Vorketh's vision, blurred with pure fury. "All ships, regroup," he roared. But the fleet was already beyond saving. His officers were panicked. His ships were in chaos. The Xiverian dreadnought Shadow Maw, in its desperate attempt to escape, collided with another battlecruiser. Both ships erupted in flames. "Admiral," the voice whispered. Vorketh turned. His first officer, his most loyal second-in-command, was staring at him with wide, terrified eyes. "Admiral," the officer repeated, voice shaking. We need to retreat." Silence. Vorketh's claws trembled. He had never retreated before, never even considered it. And yet, for the first time in his long, decorated career, he realized he had no choice. The mighty Xiverian Empire, conqueror of 100 worlds, had just been outmatched, and humanity was only getting started. Humans break the rules of war. Admiral Vorketh's breathing was slow, controlled, but his claws told the truth. They gripped his command throne so tightly that the reinforced metal beneath them had started to crack. This battle should have been over. It should have been a display of dominance, a lesson to these upstart humans that the Xiverian Empire was supreme. Instead, his fleet was being dismantled like prey caught in a predator's jaws. "Admiral, our forces are in full retreat," a panicked officer reported. Vorketh's yellow eyes flashed with rage. "Who gave that order?" The officer hesitated, then his voice dropped to a whisper. "No one did, sir. They're running on their own." Vorketh felt a chill crawl down his spine. His warriors, proud Xiverian soldiers, trained from birth to never surrender, were fleeing without orders. Not because they were losing, because they were terrified. The unpredictable enemy. Vorketh forced his mind to work, to think through the madness unfolding around him. How were humans doing this? They had no empire, no vast war fleets, no legendary battle history, and yet they fought like nothing he had ever seen before. It wasn't just their firepower. It wasn't just their technology. It was how they fought. The Xiverian fleet followed the ancient rules of war, honor, formations, tactical maneuvers passed down for generations. Humans. They broke every rule. They didn't engage head-on. They didn't follow predictable patterns. They didn't fight like warriors. They fought like monsters. One moment, they were sniping out the fleet's critical systems with surgical precision. Weapons, engines, life support. The next moment, they were turning the enemy's own ships against them, hacking into navigation controls, and sending Xiverian cruisers crashing into each other. Vorketh had fought 100 battles across the galaxy, but this was the first time he had ever seen an enemy treat war like a game they had already won. And worst of all, they were enjoying it. The breaking of an empire. A new transmission came through. Vorketh expected to see the human captain's face, expected more mocking words. But instead, it was the wreckage of his own fleet. The humans had hijacked their communication network and were broadcasting the destruction live to every Xiverian warship. The screen showed burning Xiverian dreadnoughts, their massive warforms now nothing but glowing ruins drifting in space. Scyverian crew members, those who had managed to eject in escape pods, were left helplessly floating in the void. The human captain's voice echoed through every Scyverian ship. "You thought this was war," he said, his voice almost amused. "We never saw it that way." There was a brief silence. Then, for us, this was a hunt. Vorkath's last stand. Vorkath's vision blurred with rage. His fleet was dying around him, but he refused to accept defeat. "Focus fire on their lead ship," he roared. "Overload the core if you have to. If we go down, we take them with us." His officers hesitated. "Do it," Vorkath bellowed. His flagship's core hummed as energy surged into its primary cannon, enough power to vaporize an entire continent. But just as the final blast charged up, the Dominion's wrath shuddered. The entire bridge flickered with emergency lights. Vorkath spun to his engineers. "Report." A pale-looking officer turned, his voice barely a whisper. "Admiral, our ship is no longer under our control." Vorkath's stomach dropped. The viewing screen changed, and now, instead of battle, instead of wreckage, it showed a human standing inside his ship. The final blow, humanity's power revealed. A single soldier, clad in advanced human battle armor, stood inside the Dominion's Wrath's engine room. A hacked security feed broadcasted his image straight to the Scyverian Admiral's bridge, and in the human's gloved hand was a small flickering device. Vorkath's breath caught in his throat. It was the ship's core override. The human spoke, his voice cold and sharp. "You lost the moment you underestimated us." Then, without hesitation, he pressed the button. The Empire falls. The Dominion's wrath, the pride of the Scyverian fleet, shook as its core overloaded from the inside. Vorkath had one last moment of disbelief, one last second to comprehend that his entire fleet, his legacy, his empire's pride had just been broken by a species he once called primitive. Then, the flagship exploded, and with it, so did the last shred of Scyverian dominance in the galaxy. Psychological warfare. Fear creeps in. The Dominion's wrath was no more. The Scyverian flagship, the strongest warship ever built by their empire, had been reduced to a burning wreck drifting in space. The explosion had sent shockwaves across the battlefield, shaking what remained of the once mighty Scyverian fleet. For the first time in recorded history, the Scyverian Empire's forces were leaderless. And it wasn't just their flagship that had been destroyed. It was their pride, their confidence, their belief that they were untouchable. The silence of the damned. On the bridge of the remaining Scyverian warships, no one spoke. Officers stared at the viewing screens in disbelief. Soldiers clutched their weapons, their hands trembling. For generations, they had conquered, dominated, crushed civilizations under their boots. And now, for the first time, they were the ones who had been broken. The humans hadn't just defeated them. They had humiliated them. Then, the human captain's voice echoed once more over the open comms. "Still there, Scyverians." There was no answer, because no one had one. The Scyverian officers, once filled with arrogance, now felt a weight pressing on their chests. It was fear. The whisper in the darkness. "Sir," a Scyverian tactical officer whispered to his commander. "The humans are broadcasting across all frequencies." The commander stared at him. Broadcasting what? The officer hesitated, then patched the transmission through. On every screen, in every remaining Scyverian warship, a single image appeared. It wasn't the wreckage of their fallen fleet. It wasn't a demand for surrender. It was a human soldier standing in the ruins of their flagship. The same soldier who had pressed the final button to destroy the Dominion's wrath. He stood there, relaxed, helmet tucked under his arm, a faint smirk on his face. And then he spoke. "Tell your empire." Silence. "Tell them what happened here today." The soldier took a step forward, boots echoing against the broken metal beneath him. Tell them that when you faced humanity, you didn't just lose. You didn't just suffer defeat. He tilted his head slightly, voice steady. You learned what it's like to be hunted. Then, the transmission cut. And that was when the real nightmare began. The Exivarian retreat, and the fear that followed. Across the Exivarian fleet, panic set in. Some ships immediately jumped to warp, fleeing as fast as their engines could take them. Others hesitated, their captains frozen between disbelief and terror. The humans, let them run. They didn't pursue. They didn't fire on the retreating ships. Because they didn't need to. They had already won. Not just the battle, but the war of the mind. The Exivarian Empire had always ruled through fear, through the belief that they were superior, that their enemies were nothing but prey. But today, they were the ones who felt like prey. The survivors of the battle, those lucky enough to escape with their lives, would return home with a single message, a warning, a whisper that would spread like wildfire across the empire. Beware the humans, the Empire's last stand. The Exivarian Imperial High Command sat in silence. The massive war chamber, usually filled with the cold confidence of the Empire's top commanders, now felt hollow. The holographic display at the center of the room flickered, showing the wreckage of Dominion's wrath, their most powerful warship, reduced to nothing but drifting ruins. The fleet was gone. The Exivarian Grand Admiral was dead. And the humans, they had let the survivors escape, not out of mercy, out of something far worse. They wanted the galaxy to know. They wanted the fear to spread. The Council of Denial, Emperor Kalzoreth, the supreme ruler of the Exivarian Empire, stared at the footage. His golden eyes, once filled with the fire of conquest, now twitched in disbelief. "This is a fabrication," he growled. His voice echoed across the chamber. A trick. The humans must have used some illusion, some deception. But no one agreed. The silence from the warlords, the admirals, the strategists, it told the truth. This was real. They had lost. A younger warlord, still filled with rage instead of reason, slammed his fist against the table. "This is temporary," he shouted. "We are the Exivarian Empire. We do not bow to prey. We will retaliate. We will crush them." Silence. Then a voice spoke. "No, we won't." The human message, a warning to the galaxy. The galaxy was never the same after that day. The Exivarian Empire, once the undisputed conquerors of the stars, had suffered a defeat so complete, so utterly humiliating, that the entire balance of power in the galaxy shifted overnight. But it wasn't just defeat that haunted them. It was what came after. The silence before the storm. For weeks, the Exivarian High Command expected retaliation. They braced for a human invasion, expecting fleets of these phantom warships to arrive at their doorstep, ready to crush their worlds the same way they had crushed 100 civilizations before. But the humans never came. They didn't send an armada. They didn't send demands for surrender. They didn't even acknowledge their victory. They simply disappeared. Like shadows, they faded back into the void, as if the entire battle had been nothing more than a warning. And that, more than anything, terrified the Exivarians. The broadcast that shook the galaxy. 1 month after the battle, a message was transmitted across every major empire, republic, and dominion in the known galaxy. It was not a threat. It was not a declaration of war. It was simply a statement. A recording of a lone human soldier standing on the ruins of the Exivarian flagship, helmet tucked under one arm. He looked calm, relaxed, and then he spoke. To those who watch, his voice was steady, controlled, not arrogant, not threatening, simply factual. "You once called us primitive, weak, inferior. You believed we were prey." A pause. Then the faintest hint of a smirk. "Now do you know the truth?" The camera zoomed out, revealing the shattered remains of the HFY fleet behind him, a graveyard of ships that had once belonged to the most feared empire in the galaxy. The human tilted his head slightly. "We are not conquerors. We do not seek war. But if you come for us, if you bring war to our doorstep," his eyes narrowed, "we will not fight you." A pause. Then his voice dropped to something colder. "We will hunt you." Silence. Then the screen flickered to black. The reaction: fear, confusion, and chaos. The entire galaxy erupted. In the high palaces of the Zalkari Dominion, the insectoid overlords whispered in hushed, terrified voices. On the floating city worlds of the Vashari Consortium, traders scrambled to rewrite their risk assessments, afraid to even mention humanity in business dealings. In the dark halls of the HFY Empire, military leaders held secret meetings, arguing whether they should prepare for war or surrender before it even began. But there was one reaction that spread through every species, every government, every ruler across the stars: paranoia. Because if the humans were telling the truth, if they had always been capable of this, then what else had they been hiding? The birth of a legend. Rumors began to spread. Stories of human warships that could vanish into thin air. Tales of soldiers who could break an empire with a single battle. Whispers that humanity didn't just fight wars. They ended them. And soon, across every corner of the galaxy, a new unspoken rule emerged. A single terrifying law that no ruler dared to break. Do not go to war with humanity. Because if you do, you won't just lose. You'll never be heard from again.